I have always had something sticks in my craw about the big push that has been going on for decades to get your organ donation card. Be one of those people who, if something happens to you, that your organs will go to help somebody else. After all, it's a noble cause. It's a wonderful cause. It's such a positive thing. Problem I have with it is in a system, in a society, in which the values of that society are so screwed up, I'm not sure that I can trust the people making those recommendations. Award-winning author Wesley J. Smith is a senior fellow in human rights and bioethics at the Discovery Institute. He is also a consultant to the International Task Force on Euthanasia and Assisted Suicide and a special consultant for the Center for Bioethics and Culture. He is the author of Forced Exit, Euthanasia, Assisted Suicide, and the New Duty to Die, a broad-based criticism of the assisted suicide euthanasia movement. I didn't even know there was a movement. Culture of Death, the Assault on Medical Ethics in America, a warning about the dangers of the modern bioethics movement, and his newest book, A Rat is a Pig is a Dog is a Boy, The Human Cost of the Animal Rights Movement, a critical look at the animal rights liberation movement. Wesley is also the author of Consumer's Guide to a Brave New World, in which he explores the morality, science, and business aspects of human cloning, stem cell research, and genetic engineering. Wesley J. Smith, welcome to the Global Freedom Report.
Hi, Brent. How are you?
I'm doing just fine. How did you become so involved in the medical and bioethics? Do I call it an industry?
Yeah, not on purpose. What happened is I was busy doing other things, and a friend of mine committed suicide under the influence of Hemlock Society literature. The Hemlock Society used to be the biggest assisted suicide advocacy group. It's now called Compassion and Choices, changed euphemisms from a actual reality-based title. And I was so upset by what I found. She had what were called then the Hemlock Quarterlies, the newsletter, and they basically taught her how to commit suicide, told her what drugs to use, how to use a plastic bag, and gave her moral permission to do it, and that's what she did. And I was so upset because her friends were trying to keep her in life that I wrote a piece, a column in Newsweek magazine called The Whispers of Strangers. And among the warnings that I had about the assisted suicide movement, that eventually these people could be used as sources of organs to commit assisted suicide. That's actually happening now in Belgium, if you want to talk. Got so much hate mail for what I thought was a non-controversial column. I thought I should get involved in that issue. And that led me to look at what was happening generally in bioethics, how we're treating elderly people in hospitals, how we're treating people with disabilities and so forth. And one thing led to another, and you see the progression.
No kidding. Absolutely. Yeah, you've done a tremendous amount on this. You wrote Forced Exit, Euthanasia, Assisted Suicide, and the New Duty to Die. What were you referring to in the title when you said New Duty to Die, and to whom are we supposed to owe this supposed new duty?
Well, you're beginning to see this unfold. The original title was Assisted Suicide, Euthanasia, and Legalized Murder, but we updated it. It was revised. Take a look at what's happening with potential for healthcare rationing, of people being denied life-sustaining treatment based on quality of life judgments. We already see in some hospitals people are being kicked out of the ICU when they want that treatment to stay alive based on quality of life judgment. There's a law in Texas, for example, that permits a bioethics committee to decide that even though you want this life-sustaining treatment, they don't think your life is worth the expense or the quality of life is worth living, they can just deny it unilaterally, and then you have 10 days to find another hospital, and since that tends to be expensive care, good luck with that. You actually have some, it's a minority view, but some in the bioethical movement arguing that there is a positive duty to die, that when you reach a certain age, not being ready to die is a moral failing. There have been books written about this, articles in the Hastings Center report. Mainstream media often doesn't cover what's going on in terms of the professional journals. But if you take a look at what some of the medical journals are writing about and some of the bioethical journals, it'll turn your hair white. It's a very alarming anti-Hippocratic medicine, anti-sanctity of life advocacy.
Our question for your consideration today, as you listen to this discussion, do you believe it is ethical to encourage people to be organ donors? Do you believe it is ethical to encourage people to be organ donors? 888-747-1968. My guest is award-winning author Wesley J. Smith, whose credentials would take the rest of the interview to go over, so we're just going to skip them for now. Let us suffice it to say, he's extremely credible and knows what he's talking about. Wesley, welcome back.
Thanks very much. The $20 is in the mail.
Thank you. It's perhaps miraculous that human beings have the ability to provide replacement parts for failed organs in others. The Creator certainly made us well. However, I believe environment is a key factor in any evaluation, and in today's globalist culture in which the ruling social values are money, position, power, and convenience, organ donation has become an industry. Now, I know you've mentioned a few things already about it, but overall, how would you characterize current state of this industry, legally, financially, and morally?
That's a whole book, but let's start. First off, I support organ donation and am an organ donor on my license. I do that even though there are risks to ethical organ donation. When the industry began, and to some degree you're right, there is a lot of money made in organ donation. However, I do believe that for the most part, the organ donor rules and procedures are ethical when they are followed, and most of the time they are. But we've got some problems, and I'm talking about the United States. First of all, we do not have universal protocols that apply everywhere. Various hospitals do it in different ways. Secondly, you do have a situation where there are many very powerful voices in organ donation medicine and in bioethics that are seeking to liberalize the current rules. That is, right now, in order to be an organ donor, doing away with somebody, for example, who altruistically donates a kidney like to a sister. If you're going to be an organ donor, you have to be dead in order to be a donor. There are those who wish to change those rules to allow somebody like, say, Terry Schiavo, and I use her name just because everybody knows the condition she was in, profoundly cognitively disabled. They want to be able to use people like Terry as organ donors, which in effect would become killing for organs. I do not believe we are doing that now. I believe that if we're going to maintain not only an ethical organ donation enterprise, but one in which people will be willing to be donors, we must keep this line from being liberalized. There's another form of organ donation which is called call it heart death donation. There's brain death and heart death. Those are very popular terms. They're not precise. Brain death, for example, doesn't mean every cell in your brain is dead. It means that your whole brain and every constituent part of your brain is no longer operating as a brain. Heart death means your heart and lung processes have irreversibly stopped functioning, and therefore you are dead and can be declared dead. Well, what they do now in some situations is somebody is being taken off life support. They will sometimes bring that person into a surgical theater, take them off life support, usually a breathing apparatus. If that person dies, stops breathing and has cardiac arrest, they will wait, say, 5 minutes and then declare death and then proceed to the organ procurement. Now, some in the organ procurement industry wish to do away with all waiting times altogether.
And what you're referring to is the United Network for Organ Sharing that wants to change those rules and basically says...
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
If your heart...
And then once you do that, you're doing away with, it seems to me, you're beginning to look at people more as organ farms than as living patients. The people's trust in organ donation, I think, is a mile wide and an inch deep. And all of these kinds of attempts to liberalize the ethical rules, because we have waiting lists. that's where a lot of this is coming from, the push for the waiting list. But the more you try to liberalize these ethical rules, the more you begin to break promises that were made at the beginning of the organ transplant time in medicine, the less you will have people trust organ donation, and the fewer, I believe, people willing to be donors there will be. I am, as I said, currently a donor, but if they made those changes, I might change my mind. I would still tell my wife, look, if I'm really, really, really dead, I want to be a donor, but if they start making it so somebody can be alive and be harvested, I will no longer be a donor. But we are not yet at that.
Yeah, well, let your wife be the decider, not the bureaucrat. I mean, that's basically.
No, I agree with that. But even right now, with me having that little dot on my driver's license, if my wife picked up the bus, they wouldn't take my organ.
Well, let me ask you this: when people are encouraged when people are encouraged to become organ donors by various organizations, what considerations are they encouraged to think about when deciding whether or not to do so, or are they?
You mean the people who would be the donors?
Yeah, an organ donation company comes out and puts out a TV commercial and says, "Hey, do your duty and be an organ donor." Do these organizations encourage people to think about this, or are they just, I just want to get the numbers up? Well,
I think obviously they want to get the numbers up because from their perspective,
but at what cost?
They're looking at, that's what we have to be careful about. They are looking at longer lines for people who could benefit from organs and whose lives could be saved. Now, why does that happen? A couple of things have come together, which is very interesting. First, we have fewer catastrophic head injuries than we once did because of things like helmet rules, airbags in cars, and that kind of thing. So there are actually fewer of the kind of catastrophic brain injuries that usually led to organ donation than we used to have because people are actually not suffering those kinds of injuries due to these safety procedures. Secondly, the organ medicine has actually improved tremendously, so that the number of people who could benefit from organs has increased and so forth. The ability to for not having organ rejection, that kind of medicine has improved and so forth. And so while you have perhaps a lower pool of potential donors and an increased pool of potential recipients going on, that has increased the waiting list. The temptation then becomes, because somebody like Terry Schiavo has less of a use for her liver than, say, Uncle Charlie does, who otherwise, other than a bad liver, could still go on and lead a very happy and productive life. There are some in bioethics and in organ transplant medicine who are saying, well, we should allow people like Terry Schiavo to be harvested. And I say absolutely not. If we ever start treating human beings as a mere corn crop ripe for the harvest, we will have passed not only an ethical line in the sand, which will turn us into immorality, but I think you will destroy the whole basis of people being willing to make their organs.
Well, and I think you just pointed out the difference between donation and harvesting, as a matter of fact, which is really very, very on the point. And we
also have a problem, I think, of some people skipping the line. For example, Mickey Mantle received a liver when he had liver cancer and should not have. We also have what I call biological colonialism going on, where people who are in the United States and other countries who have a lot of money are going to China, for example, paying $100,000 for a liver, not caring where that liver came from. Well, where that liver came from was probably a murdered political prisoner who was tissue typed for the person who's willing to pay $100,000 and killed for that liver.
Well, in essence, what you're saying is they're quantifying life. They're basically saying, like Terry Schiavo, well, she has less use for it than this other guy, and therefore quantifying it, this other guy should get it, and it completely disregards the spiritual value of life, and it disregards. It basically says there's no God, because it says that we know everything and we're quantifying it because we have all the information. And that's where I think.
Well, the different let's be really clear. What I said about China is happening now.
Oh, I have no
what
doubt.
What we're worried about with regard to somebody like Terry Schiavo, at least in the United States, isn't happening yet. And one of the reasons I think shows like this are important in this topic is the more you shine a light on those proposals, the less likely they are to be implemented.
Or at least the less likely they're to be implemented in the shadows, in the dark, and that's exactly what we try to do. We have Lee calling in from Texas. Lee, welcome to the show. You're on the air with Wesley J. Smith. Lee, are you there? Okay, I'm not hearing Lee.
I don't hear Lee either.
Okay, over in the studio, can you see what you can do there? And see if you can get Lee up. All right, well, we're not hearing Lee. Lee, you might want to just call back in or something. I don't know what's happened there. And we'll get you right on if you call back in. Are there, speaking about other countries, are there other countries that have developed organ donor programs similar to or different from the programs that exist in the U.S.?
Oh, sure. I mean, most of the Western nations have these programs. The United Kingdom actually has a more liberal definition of brain death in the United States. They will say if your brain stem is dead, that you're dead. In the United States, that's not true. There are some very poor countries, because they're so concerned about this biological colonialism, that they're passing laws to prevent people from coming from rich countries to take advantage of destitute people. The Philippines, for example, passed a law that said nobody who is non-citizen can have an organ transplant in the Philippines, because you had people coming from, say, America and paying somebody, $5,000 for a kidney, which is a lot of money to that person, and receiving the transplant. Pakistan passed a law that said you cannot have a kidney donated unless you were related to the person who received the kidney. In fact, Pakistan, longest time, thought was, fortunately for them, the kidney bazaar of the world. I mean, you have people who think their lives are so important that they can take advantage of destitute people in this way. And of course, these destitute people who sell their kidneys, they do not have the kind of medical treatment available to them that might be necessary not to have that cause them problems. And even in the United States, where we're not allowed to buy and sell organs, but people can give kidneys to other people if they choose to. Even here, with the best of medical treatment, sometimes that creates a health problem and in very few cases, death for the donor. I mean, we have two kidneys for a reason, and we can give one away and still survive and do very well in most cases. But we have to be very careful not to make sure that somebody is not giving away a vital organ under pressure or coercion, and certainly because they have a money problem.
Now, something that bothers me. Organs are being donated. Now, why is it that if you look at a hospital bill for a transplant, you will see that now they're certainly entitled to be charging for the skill and the time of these doctors to remove the organ and put it in and all that. But they're actually charging for the organ. They're actually charging huge amounts of money for the organ, which they got for nothing.
Well, not nothing because of the cost pyramid, but I think that's something that should be looked at. There is a lot of money made in the organ transplant field, not only by the surgeons, who have to be obviously very well trained and very skilled, and the people who help support that. I certainly would not object to having a good look-see at the economics of all of it, particularly given the way things are going in terms of healthcare payments. But I think we have to be careful also at the same time not to demonize people who work in that industry as if they were just in it to greed, I think that it's easy to think that, but I've interacted with people who are in this industry. I've been very impressed with them. On the other hand, there have been cases of abuse. So I think we have to be careful not to overstate that matter and not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, as we also trust verify in terms of making sure that the ethics of organ transplantation and organ donation are maintained.
Now, can people who are organ donors revoke their status. Somebody says,
yes,
you know,
absolutely.
when I
Absolutely.
signed up, I thought it was one thing. Now I'm not happy with it, and I
Yes,
just don't want to be part.
Yes, you can, and you do not have to be a donor, and tell your family you don't want to be a donor. You can create in your advance directive. The medical directive, if you create one, you can change your mind on those, and if you choose to change your mind on being an organ donor, you can. Now, there's another threat, since we're looking at where things might go. In some countries in Europe, here we have what is called an opt-in system, meaning you're not an organ donor unless you opt in or your family. Let's say you're in a terrible accident, and then your family decides, yes, we want him to be a donor after he's died. There are some countries, such as Spain, where they have an opt-out system, meaning it's called presumed consent, that unless you say you don't want to be a donor, you are a donor. And I would really object to that in the United States for some of the very reasons that you suggested. Because consider if you're in a hospital catastrophically injured or ill, and the doctors know there's an opt-out kind of situation, and you haven't opted out, well, the doctors may say that doesn't affect our decisions in terms of caring for you, but I would begin to wonder about that in terms of trust, particularly given the attack against the sanctity of human life that we see in bioethics in this country generally. And again, looking back at Belgium legalized euthanasia in around 2002, and they are now bragging, their doctors brag that they take organs from euthanasia victims, and they actually are going out with a PowerPoint presentation looking around Europe saying that the best candidates for euthanasia and organ donation, organ harvesting, people with neuromuscular disabilities, which is not like multiple sclerosis, which is not a terminal illness necessarily, because they're saying that the organs are good. And in fact, in a recent medical journal study, the Belgian doctors talked about four cases of euthanasia and then organ harvesting, and one of the patients was mentally ill. So once you accept this idea of a culture of death, and you begin to tie in organ issues with that, my warning back in 1993 in Newsweek that we could tie euthanasia and assisted suicide into organ donation as a fund of society has come true in Belgium. And I can't think of anything more dangerous, because you've given society a utilitarian stake in killing sick and disabled and mentally ill patients, and you've given those patients who may be having a hard time getting through the night, who think their lives are no longer worth living, you give them the belief that their society is better off with their death than with their lives. So these are some lines we have to be very careful about. We cannot legalize assisted suicide, because I believe it will lead to what's happening in Belgium over the long haul.
And Wesley, let me bookmark you for a moment. Take a breath, because Lee has gotten back on the line finally and everything. I want to get her in before we run out of time. Lee is calling in from Texas. Are you there, Lee? Hello?
No, you still can't hear me.
There we go. All right.
You got me.
We hear you now, Lee. Go
Hi.
ahead.
And thank you for opening up discussion on what I consider this to be an extremely important topic, Brent. And thank you, Mr. Smith, for coming on the show. You were talking about the cost and the procurement of the organs, et cetera, et cetera. And in looking at this, I pulled up a chart out of 2008, okay? And to procure the heart, that was at the cost of $94,300. For a year of care, it's $787,000 plus. And it occurs to me that this is class lifeware, you know, where the more expensive, the richer you are, the more you can purchase organs. To say, does any of this money go to the donor at all? I mean, they've just lost a loved one. Do they get any money? They could probably use it, because they don't have the money to get a new heart.
Well, it's against the law in the United States to sell organs, and I think that's proper. If you end up with a situation where organs can be sold, poor will sell, and as you pointed out, rich will buy. So organs in this country are not allowed to be bought and sold. As I said, in other countries, you have a terrible organ black market going on. In China, people are killed so that organ purchasers can get their organs. We've even had books written in this country. One is called Larry's Kidney, about a fellow who went to China and bought a kidney and wrote a book that was well reviewed in the New York Times without any concern that the kidney probably came from a killed political prisoner. We have to try, it seems to me, to keep the commercial matter out of the donation side, and certainly in terms of the people who are doing the transplantation and the caring for people, they're going to be making money because these are doctors of highest levels of skills, but that doesn't mean that there isn't too much profit for perhaps the organ middlemen. But I don't know enough about the economics of that issue to have an opinion, but I certainly think it would be worth looking into. And I do not want to see us turn organs into a commercial enterprise, especially for poor people.
And I gotta put a close on it there. We're out of time. Lee, thank you for the call. My guest has been Wesley J. Smith. If you'd like more information on these issues, on his work, his various books, and the issues concerning bioethics and the ethics of organ donation, go to www.wesleyjsmith.com. Wesley, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Brent. I appreciated it.